Nevermore by Jessica Townsend, Chapter 2, The Trials of Morrigan Crow. Chapter 2, Bid Day. "Do not speak to anyone, Morrigan," her father muttered for the 100th time that morning while they were hurrying up the stone steps of the town hall in great strides, and she really struggled to match him. "You will be sitting on the stage with me where everyone can see you. Do you understand? Don't you dare make anything happen. No broken hips or swarms of wasps or falling ladders or shark attacks," offered Morrigan. Corvus rounded on her, his face blooming, scarlet patches all over. "Do you think this is funny? Everyone in the town hall will be watching to see what you do and how it will reflect on me. Are you actively trying to ruin my career?" "Well, no," said Morrigan, wiping a bit of angry spit from her face. "Not actively." Well, Morrigan had been to the town hall on several other occasions, usually when her father's popularity was at its lowest ebb and he needed a public show of support from his family. Flanked by stone columns and sitting in the shadow of an enormous iron clock tower, the gloomy-looking town hall was Jackaflax's most important building. But the clock tower, although Morrigan usually tried not to look at it, was much more interesting. The sky-face clock was no ordinary clock. There were no hands and no lines to mark the hours, only a round glass face with an empty sky inside that changed with the passing of the age. From the palest pink dawn light of morning tide, through the golden bright basking to the sunset orange glow of dwindle sun, and into the dusky darkening blue sky of the gloaming. Today, like every day of this year, they were in the gloaming. Morrigan knew that meant it wasn't long until the sky-face clock would fade into the fifth and final colour of its cycle, the inky star-strewn blackness of eventide, the last day of the age. But that was a year away. Shaking the thought out of her head, Morrigan followed her father up the steps. There was an air of excitement in the normally sombre echoing hall. Several hundred children from all over Jackaflax had arrived wearing their Sunday best. The boys with their hair slicked down and the girls with pigtails and ribbons and hats. They sat straight back in rows of chairs, under familiar stern gaze of President Wintersea, whose portrait hung in every home, shop and government building in the Republic. Always watching, always looming large. The riotous sound turned to a buzzing murmur as Morrigan and Corvus took their seats on the stage behind the podium. Everywhere Morrigan looked, eyes narrowed in her direction. Corvus placed a hand on her shoulder in an awkward, unnatural gesture of paternal affection, while some local reporters snapped photographs of them. Definitely front-page material, Morrigan thought. The doomed daughter and her soon-to-be grieving father, a terrifically tragic pair. She tried to look extra forlorn, which wasn't easy when she was being blinded by the camera flashes. After a triumphant chorus of Wintersea Republic, the national anthem, "Onward, upward, forward, huzzah!" Corvus opened the ceremony with a very dull speech, followed by various headmasters and local business people who all had to chime in. Then finally, the Lord Mayor of Jackaflax brought out a polished wooden box and began to read the bids. Morrigan sat up straight in her seat, feeling a flutter of excitement she couldn't quite explain. "Madame Honora Selvi of the Silklands Ballet Company," he read from the front of the first envelope he pulled out, "wishes to present her bid for Molly Jenkins." There was a squeal of delight from the third row, and Molly Jenkins leapt from her seat, rushing to the stage to curtsy and collect the envelope that contained her bid letter. "Well done, Miss Jenkins. See one of the aides at the back of the hall after the ceremony, dear, and they'll direct you to your interview room." He retrieved another envelope. "Major Jacob Jackley of Poisonwood School of Warfare wishes to present his bid for Michael Salisbury." Michael's friends and family cheered as he accepted his bid. "Mr. Henry Sniggle, owner of the proprietor of Sniggle's Snake Emporium, wishes to present his bid for Alice Carter for a herpetology apprenticeship." Dear me, how fascinating. The bidding carried on for almost an hour. The children in the hall watched anxiously as each new envelope was drawn from the box. Every announcement was met with shouts of joy from the recipient and their parents, and a collective sigh of disappointment from all those who didn't get chosen. Morrigan began to get fidgety. The novelty of bid day had worn off a bit, really. She thought it would be exciting. She hadn't accounted for the dull, gnawing jealousy that settled in the pit of her stomach as she watched child after child snatch up their envelope, each one containing some shiny future she would never have for herself. Ivy's words echoed in her head. "You go to bid day ceremony, whatever for?" Morrigan felt a rush of blood to her face, remembering how Ivy had laughed. She tried to resist her sudden, frantic urge to escape the stifling warmth of the hall. A cheer erupted from the front row when Corey Jamison was bid on by Mrs. Ginnifer O'Reilly from the prestigious Wintersea Academy, a government-sponsored school in the capital. It was his second bid of the day. The first was from the Geology Institute of Prosper, the richest state in the Republic, where they mined rubies and sapphires. My, said the Lord Mayor, patting his fat stomach as Corey collected his second envelope and waved it over his head, to even louder cheers from his family in the audience. 2 bids! This is a turn-up for the books. The first double bid Jackaflax has seen in a good few years. Well done, lad, well done. You have a big decision to make. And now, we have an anonymous bid for. The Lord Mayor paused, glancing at the VIP section and back to the letter in his hand. He cleared his throat. For Miss Morrigan Crow. Silence fell. Morrigan blinked. Had she imagined it? No. Corvus rose slightly from his seat, glaring at the Lord Mayor, who shrugged helplessly. Miss Crow, he said, waving her forward. A chorus of whispers arose from the audience at once, like a flock of birds startled in flight. It's a mistake, Morrigan thought. The bid is for somebody else. She looked out across the rows of children, nothing but scowling and pointing fingers. Had the town hall just grown twice as big, twice as bright? It felt like a spotlight was shining directly onto her head. The Lord Mayor beckoned her again, looking fretful and impatient. Morrigan took a deep breath and forced her legs to stand and walk forward, each footstep echoing excruciatingly in the rafters. Taking the envelope in her trembling hand, she looked up at the Lord Mayor, waiting for him to laugh in her face and snatch it back. Oh, this isn't for you. But he simply stared back at her, a deep line of worry between his eyebrows. Morrigan turned the envelope over, her heart pounding, and there, in the fancy cursive handwriting, was her name. Miss Morrigan Crow. It really was for her. Despite the growing tension in the hall, Morrigan felt lighter inside. She fought the urge to laugh. Well done, Miss Crow, said the Lord Mayor with an unconvincing smile. Now take your seat and see one of the Eads out of the back after the ceremony." "Gregory," said Corvus in a warning undertone. The Lord Mayor shrugged again. "It's tradition, Corvus," he whispered. "More than that, it's the law." The ceremony continued, and Morrigan, stunned and silent, sat down again. She didn't dare open her bid. Her father was very still, glancing at the ivory-coloured envelope in every few seconds as if he wanted to seize it from her hands and set fire to it. Morrigan tucked it away in a pocket of her dress, just to be safe, and held it tightly as 8 more children accepted their bids. She hoped the ceremony wouldn't last much longer, despite the Lord Mayor's brave attempts to jolly on as if nothing had happened. She could still feel several hundred eyes burning into her back. "Mrs. Ardith Asher of Devereux Ladies' College," never heard of it, "wishes to present her bid for—" The Lord Mayor trailed off. He took a handkerchief from his pocket and mopped the sweat from his brow. "For Miss Morrigan Crow." This time the audience gasped. Morrigan moved as if in a dream to collect her second bid of the day. Without even looking to see if it was really her name on the front, she put the envelope, pink and sweet-smelling, into her pocket to join the other. Just minutes later, Morrigan's name was called a third time. She rushed forward to collect her bid from Colonel Van Leeuwenhoek of the Harmon Military Academy, hurrying back to her seat as swiftly as possible and staring determinedly at her shoes. She tried to ignore the swarm of butterflies holding a celebration in her stomach. It was hard not to grin. A man in the third row stood up and shouted, "But she's cursed! This isn't right!" The man's wife pulled at his arm, trying to shush him, but he wouldn't be shushed. "3 bids! Never heard of such a thing!" A rumble of agreement spread through the audience. Morrigan felt her happiness stutter like a dying gaslight. The man was right. She was cursed. What could a cursed child possibly do with 3 bids? She'd never be allowed to accept them. The Lord Mayor held out his hand, appealing for quiet. "Sir, we must continue or we'll be here all day. If you could please be quiet, I'll get to the bottom of this most unusual turn of events after the ceremony." The Lord Mayor was hoping for calm to be restored. He was to be deeply disappointed, for when he took out the next envelope, it read, "Jupiter North wishes to present his bid—" "Oh, I don't believe this— Morrigan Crow." The town hall erupted as children and parents alike leapt to their feet, shouting over each other, turning various shades of pink and purple, and demanding to know what the meaning of this madness was. 4 bids, 2 was uncommon, 3 was highly unusual, but 4 absolutely unheard of. There were 12 more bids to announce. The Lord Mayor sped through them, his face dissolving into sweaty relief each time he read a name that wasn't Morrigan's. At last, his hand scrambled around the bottom of the box and came up empty. "That was the final envelope," said the Lord Mayor, closing his eyes in gratitude. His voice shook. "Would all of the children who received bids please move to the back of the hall, and our aides will show you to the interview rooms where you can meet your prospective patrons. Everyone else, I'm sure you'll all, doesn't mean you're all not very capable and, well," he waved vaguely to the audience, who took it as their cue to depart. Corvus swore he would take action. He would sue. He would remove the Lord Mayor from office, but the Lord Mayor insisted on following the protocol. Morrigan must be allowed to meet her bidders if she wished to. She very much wished to, of course. Morrigan knew she'd never be able to accept any of the bids. She knew, in fact, that once the mysterious strangers discovered they'd bid on a cursed child, they'd take it all back and probably run very fast in the opposite direction. But it would be rude not to at least meet them, she reasoned. And they'd come a long way I'm sorry, Morrigan rehearsed in her head, but I'm on the cursed children's register. I'm going to die on eventide. Thank you for your time and your interest. Yes, polite and to the point. She was ushered into the room with bare walls and a desk and a chair on either side. It felt like an interrogation chamber, and in a way, Morrigan supposed it was. The idea of meeting between patron and child was that the child could ask as many questions as they wished, and the patron had to answer them honestly. It was one of the few things she'd picked up from her father's boring big day speech. Not that she would be asking any questions, Morrigan reminded herself. Thank you for your time and your interest, she repeated firmly in her head, and a man with a feathery brown hair sat in one of the chairs humming a little tune to himself. He wore a grey suit and a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles that he pushed up on his nose with one pale, slender finger. He smiled calmly, waiting for Morrigan to sit. Miss Crowe, my name is Mr. Jones. Thank you for seeing me. The man spoke swiftly in neat, clipped sentences. His voice sounded familiar. I've come on behalf of my employer. He'd like to offer you an apprenticeship. Morrigan's rehearsed speech tumbled out of her head. A little flutter returned to her stomach. One tiny, optimistic butterfly had just climbed out of its cocoon. What? What kind of apprenticeship? Mr. Jones smiled. Tiny lines wrinkled the corners of his dark, expressive eyes. An apprenticeship in his company, Squall Industries. Squall Industries, she said, frowning. That means you work for... Yes, Ezra Squall. Yes, that's it, the most powerful person in the Republic. He lowered his eyes to the table. Second most powerful, I should say, after our great president. It suddenly struck Morrigan where she had heard that voice. He was the man on the wireless talking about the wonder shortages. He looked just the way he ought to, she thought, serious and neat. Tasteful, his white, spidery hands were clasped firmly in front of him. His skin so pale it was nearly translucent. He was terribly young, but he wasn't old. There was nothing unruly about him. Nothing to mar his immaculately groomed appearance but for a thin white scar that split his left eyebrow clean in half and a splash of silvery hair at his temples. Even his movements were precise and deliberate, as if he couldn't spare the energy for any unnecessary gesture. A perfectly contained man. Morrigan narrowed her eyes. What could the second most powerful person in the Republic possibly want with me? It's not for me to say why Mr. Squall wants what he wants, said Mr. Jones, briefly unclasping his hands to straighten his spectacles again. I'm only his assistant. I carry out his wishes. Right now he wishes for you to become his student, Miss Crowe, and his heir. His heir? What does that mean? It means that he wishes for you to one day run Squall Industries in his place, to be rich and powerful beyond your wildest dreams, and to lead the greatest, most influential and most profitable organisation that has ever existed. Morrigan blinked. I'm not even allowed to lick envelopes at home. Mr. Jones looked amused. I don't believe you'll be licking envelopes at Squall Industries either. What will I be doing? Morrigan had no idea what would make her ask such a question. She tried to remember what she'd been planning to say earlier, something about being cursed. Thank you for your time, or something like that. You will be learning how to run an empire, Miss Crowe, and you will be learning from the very best. Mr. Squall is a brilliant and talented man. He will teach you everything he knows, things he hasn't taught another living soul. Not even you? Mr. Jones laughed gently. Especially not me. By the end of your apprenticeship, you will be in command of Squall Industries, mining, engineering, manufacturing and technology sectors. Over 100,000 employees all over the Republic will be reporting to you. Morrigan's eyes widened. Every citizen, every household in this country will owe you a debt of thanks. You will be their lifeline, the provider of their warmth, power, food and entertainment, their every need, every want, all reliant on the use of wonder, and all filled by the good people at Squall Industries. By you. His voice had become so soft it was almost a whisper. Morrigan leaned closer. Ezra Squall is the nation's greatest hero, he continued. More than that, he is their benevolent God, the source of their every comfort and happiness, the only living person with the ability to harvest, distribute, and command wonder. Our Republic relies on him totally. His eyes had taken on an unsettling gleam of a fanatic. One corner of his mouth curled into a strange little smile. Morrigan shrank back. She wondered if Mr. Jones loved Ezra Squall, or was afraid of him, or wanted to be him, or all three. Imagine, Miss Crewe, he whispered. Imagine how it must feel to be so beloved, so respected and needed. One day, if you work hard and do as Mr. Squall teaches, that will be you. She could imagine it. She had imagined it 100 times over, how it would feel to be liked instead of feared, to see people smile instead of flinch when she walked into a room. It was one of her favourite daydreams. But that was all it was, Morrigan told herself, shaking the cobwebs out of her head. A daydream. She sat up straight and took a deep breath, willing her voice not to tremble. I can't accept, Mr. Jones. I'm on the cursed child's register. I'm going to, to thank you for your time and, open it, said Mr. Jones, nodding at the envelope in her hand. What is it? Your contract. Morrigan shook her head, confused. My what? It's standard. He gave a tiny shrug. One shoulder. Every child commencing sponsored studies must sign a contract and have a parent or guardian sign it also. Well, there goes that, Morrigan thought. My father will never sign this. Let us worry about that. He pulled out a silver pen from his coat pocket and placed it on the table. All you have to do is sign. Mr. Squall will take care of everything. But you don't understand. I can't. I understand perfectly, Miss Crowe. Mr. Jones watched her closely, his dark eyes piercing her own. But you needn't worry about curses or registers or eventide. You needn't worry about anything ever again. Not if you're with Ezra Squall. But just sign, he nodded at the pen. Sign, and I promise you, one day you will be able to buy and sell every person who has made your life so unhappy. His glittering eyes and calm, secretive smile made Morrigan believe just for a second that he and Ezra Squall could somehow see a future for her, and that she had never dreamed possible. She reached for the pen, then hesitated. There was one last question burning inside her, the most important question of all. She looked up at Mr. Jones. Why me? There was a loud knock. The door swung open and the Lord Mayor stumbled in, looking harassed. I'm terribly sorry, Miss Crewe, he said, pressing a handkerchief to his forehead. His suit bore sweaty patches and what was left of his hair stood on end. Somebody appears to have played a horrible prank on us all. Prank? Corvus stalked in behind him, his mouth in a thin line. There you are, we're leaving. He grabbed Morrigan's arm, pulling her out of the room. Her chair tipped over and clattered on the floor. None of your so-called bidders have arrived, said the Lord Mayor, trying to catch his breath, and as he followed them into the hallway. I blame myself. I should have realised. Harmon, Military, Whatsit, Devereux, Ladery's Thingery. Nobody's heard of them. They're made up, you see. He looked from Morrigan's to her father and back again. Terribly sorry for putting you through it, Corvus, old friend. No hard feelings, I hope. Corvus glowered at the mayor. "But wait," began Morrigan. "Don't you understand?" said her father in a cold, angry voice. He snatched the envelopes off us. "I have been made a fool. It was somebody's idea of a joke. Humiliated by my own constituency." Morrigan frowned. "You're saying that my bidders," the Lord Mayor wrung his hands, "never actually existed? That's why none of them showed up? I'm sorry you had to wait. But I'm trying to tell you that one of them did show up. Mr. Jones has come on his behalf." Morrigan stopped mid-sentence as she dashed back to the interview room. His chair was empty. There was no pen, no contract. He'd disappeared. Morrigan gaped at the empty space. Had Mr. Jones slipped out while they'd been arguing? Did he change his mind? Or had he been just playing a prank on her as well? The realisation sank in swiftly like a boot to the stomach. Of course it was a joke. Why would the Republic's most powerful and important businessman want her as his apprentice? His heir. The thought was positively ridiculous. Morrigan's cheeks turned pink as a wave of belated embarrassment hit her. How could she have been so gullible? "Enough of this nonsense," said Corvus. He ripped the envelopes into tiny pieces, and Morrigan watched mournfully as they fluttered to the ground like snow. The shiny black coach pulled away from the town hall with Morrigan and her father inside. Corvus was silent. He'd already turned his attention to the ever-present stack of paperwork in the leather case, trying to salvage what was left of the working day, as if the morning's misadventure had never even happened. Morrigan turned to watch the crowd of excited children and parents spilling out of the building and into the street, chattering and waving their bid letters into the air. She felt a sharp pang of envy. "It doesn't matter," she told herself. She blinked fiercely, tears stinging her eyes. "It's just all nonsense. Doesn't matter." The crowd didn't seem to be dispersing. In fact, so many people were gathering on the street that the carriage came to a complete stop. A stream of people hurried past, heading towards the town hall and gazing up at something in the sky. "Lowry!" barked Corvus, knocking on the roof to alert the driver. "What's the hold-up? Get those people out of the way." "I'm trying to, Chancellor, I'm trying to, but—" "It's here!" shouted somebody. "It's coming!" The crowd cheered in response. Morrigan craned her neck, trying to see what was happening. People embraced in the streets, not just the bid day children, but everyone, whistling and whooping and throwing their hats in the air. "Why are they—" began Morrigan, then stopped listening. "What are those bells ringing for?" Corvus looked at her strangely. His papers slipped from his hands and scattered across the carriage floor as he pushed open the door and leapt out into the street. Morrigan followed and, looking up, saw what everyone had been running towards, the clock tower. The sky-faced clock was changing. Morrigan watched as the dusky twilight, blue, deemed to sapphire, to navy, to finally to a profound, unfathomable black, like an inkpot in the sky, like a black hole come to swallow up the world. The bells were ringing for eventide. That night, Morrigan lay awake in the dark. The bells had rung until midnight, when they were abruptly replaced by an oppressive silence. They'd been a warning, a signal to everyone that eventide was coming. But after midnight, they didn't even ring any more. Eventide was here. The last day of the age had begun. Morrigan knew she would feel frightened and sad and worried, and she did. She felt all of those things, but mostly she felt really angry. She had been cheated. It was supposed to be a 12-year age. Everyone said so. Corvus, grandmother, all of Morrigan's caseworkers, chronologists on the news. 12 years of life was already too short. But 11? Come on. Now, the sky-faced clock had turned black. The experts were all scrambling to say they'd long suspected. They'd read the signs. They'd been on the cusp of publicly announcing that, in their opinion, this year, this winter, was the last of the age. "Never mind," they all said. "We are guess this one's an 11-year age. Everyone makes mistakes, and 1 year doesn't make much difference. Except, of course, it made all the difference in the world. Happy birthday to me, Morrigan thought miserably. She tucked her stuffed rabbit, Emirate, into the crook of her arm, where he'd slept every night for as long as she could remember, and she squeezed him tight and tried to fall asleep. But there was a noise, a very small noise that was barely a noise, like a tiny whisper, a rush of air. She flicked on her lamp, and the room flooded with light. It was empty. Morrigan's heartbeat quickened. She jumped up and looked around, and under the bed, threw open the wardrobe. Nothing. No, not nothing. Something. A small white rectangle stood out against the dark wooden floorboards. Someone had slipped an envelope under her door. She picked it up and creaked the door open to peek into the hallway outside. There was nobody there. On the envelope, someone had written untidily in thick blank ink, "Jupiter North of the Windress Society wishes to present his bid for Miss Morrigan Crow again." "The Wondrous Society?" Morrigan whispered. She ripped open the envelope and pulled out 2 pieces of paper. One was a letter, the other a contract, typed and official-looking, with 2 signatures at the bottom. Above the word patron was the large messy signature of Jupiter North. The second above, parent or guardian. She couldn't read and didn't recognise it all. It certainly wasn't her father's handwriting. The third space, candidate, was blank. Waiting. Morrigan read the letter, feeling utterly bewildered. "Dear Miss Crow, congratulations! You've been selected by one of our members as a candidate for entrance into the Wondrous Society. Please be advised that your entry is not assured. Membership in the society is extremely limited, and each year hundreds of hopeful candidates compete for a place among our scholars. If you wish to join the society, please sign the enclosed contract and return it to your patron no later than the last day of winter of 11. Entrance trials will begin in spring. We wish you the very best of luck. Regards, Elder G. Quinn, Proudfoot House, Nevermore, F.S." At the bottom of the page, in a hurried black scrawl, was a brief but thrilling message. "Be ready, J.N." Death Comes to Dinner, Chapter 3.